Hello, everyone. I'm Sergio Cruz. Welcome to the webinar. I am an instructor at Code School, and I'm here with Carlos Souza, also an author here at Code School.
Hey, everyone. This is Carlos speaking. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll be talking about a JavaScript library that you might have heard about called React. We're going to look at some of the reasons why React was created, and then check out some use cases where React really shines.
Nice, yeah. So just a little overview of what we'll be covering today. The agenda for today is we'll be covering what React is and why it even exists. We'll also look at two different problems that React helps solve, and we'll show you some code demos as well because, you know, we all enjoy, just doing that, and nothing could possibly go wrong when coding live in front of thousands of people. Am I right, Carlos?
You're right, Sergio, but you know what? I sense the gods of live webinar coding are feeling generous today, so I think we should be able to get through it. And when we do, we'll reserve the last couple minutes of this webinar to answer your questions. So you'll be able to send your questions using the sidebar chat window that you see on the left there on your web page. So if you have any questions, send them over to us, and we'll be addressing them at the end of this session.
Very cool. So I'll get started with what is React. Well, we all heard it was good at some point, right? But what makes it useful? Well, React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Some people use it as the V in MVC. Why and when should you use React? Well, React was built to solve one problem: building large applications with data that changes over time. React was originally conceived at Facebook, and it's been heavily used and battle tested on products there, like the Facebook website and also Instagram. These applications contain complex UIs, and React was built to simplify some of the process behind developing these apps. After using React internally for a little while, Facebook was able to open source it, and now it's used by many major players in our industry. With that said, we've covered what React is. Why don't we cover a little bit of the use cases for it, Carlos?
Sure. So we're going to talk about two problems, two of the many problems that React helps solve. So one of the problems that React aims to solve, or at least make it simpler, is managing application state. So the way that we've been writing client-side JavaScript has made managing state overly complicated. And by state, I mean the state of web application, which is the data that it contains when we assign values to variables and then display those values to the page and whatnot, and then the changes to that data that happens over time as a person uses the application. So when someone clicks a link, when someone fills out a form, when someone clicks a button, that causes the application data to change. To make this a little bit easier to understand, let's check out this example from Facebook, from the Facebook website, that shows an issue that actually happened a couple years ago. Say you just logged into Facebook. Then you see a notification indicating that there's a new message for you. The notification is up at the top of the website on the navigation bar, right? Then when you click on the message icon, the chat box pops up at the bottom of the web page, and then you can see the message that someone sent you. Now, one would expect that once the message is read, the notification up at the top of the navigation bar would go away, right? Well, that was not the case. Even though you had no new messages left unread, this bug would cause the notification up at the top to still be there. So you would log out of Facebook, log back in, and the notification would still be there. Kind of annoying, right?
Definitely.
So this is an example of application state that's hard to manage, right? So the act of reading a new message triggers a change in the application state, which then causes changes in multiple places on the page, one being in the chat box at the bottom of the page, and the other one being at the nav bar at the top. Now, to understand how even the most brilliant team of developers from Facebook might have let this bug slip through the cracks, let's take a look at a simple example of how one might implement something like this. So this is how most people learn how to write client-side JavaScript, by listening to events and accessing the DOM directly. With direct DOM manipulation, we manipulate the DOM API directly in response to browser events. Here, on the first line, we listen for a click event on elements with the show button class. This is pretty standard jQuery code. Most of you should be familiar with it. Then, once the click event is triggered, then from inside our event handler function, we reach out to elements with the comment list class and then call the show method on them directly. Then we do something similar to elements with the hide button class. We'll listen for the click event, and then from inside this event handler, we call the hide method directly on elements with the comment list function. So as we can see, we're using direct DOM manipulation to write code that updates the DOM in response to events. This approach gets very complicated once our application grows and we need to update multiple things on the page in response to events, as we've just seen in the previous Facebook example. Now with React, we do things a little bit different, and we do not access the DOM directly.
Exactly. So with React, we do something that we're calling here indirect DOM manipulation. We don't modify it directly. Instead, we modify a state object that lives inside of our React component. And so the state object is usually modified as a response to user events and let React just handle the updates to the DOM itself. So let's look at the code example that uses React. The display logic is wrapped into an if statement that takes care of either displaying or hiding the list of comments. So again, instead of us developers writing code that updates the DOM, we write code that listens to events and updates a component state and let React update the DOM for us. This is probably the biggest mind shift your team will go through when learning how to work with React.
Definitely, Sergio. Understanding this difference was the eureka moment when I was first learning React.
Absolutely. So let's see what that looks like in practice. I think that'll be our first live demo, right?
Cool. Let's do it. So Sergio is going to move over to CodePen, and we'll send you all a link to this code so you all can check it out. And we'll start coding a simple React component. So here's what we want. We want to write a simple component that displays a number and gives us a button that we can click to increment that number. So every time we click the button, the number increments. Let's see how we can do that.
Absolutely. So I have a app component written. It's basically a class that extends React component. And down here we have the little code that is rendering that to this screen. So let's start out with just displaying a number to the screen, Carlos. I'm going to start out with 0. Okay, this is basically what we want it to look like. Then I'll be adding a button there. The button will have a plus sign right after it. So as far as looks, if we wait for the CodePen to reload down here, we can see that visually we kind of accomplished what we're looking for. But obviously, if I click, nothing changes, right? Well, the part of the reason why it's not changing is because it's just a hard-coded 0 here. Now, since this is part of the state that changes over time, we kind of want to implement a state object. Okay, so state is, again, just an object in React. So to declare an initial state in React, we're going to declare a constructor, and we just set a plain JavaScript object. I'm going to call the property of the state that we'll be using num, short for number. Okay, and then instead of displaying 0, I will display this.state.num. Now this should still work. It's still rendering as 0. If I were to change it to if I were to change the initial state over to 5, we can see that it's working down there. We could see that the page is reloading. Nothing too interesting so far, but we get to add a click event here. Now, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to make an inline arrow function. This is probably less than ideal. We might refactor this. But yeah, let's just call a method. Now, this is a React method called setState, and this allows us to change the state of the application. So we're going to change the num property of the state, and we want it to increase by 1. So let's say this.state.num, perhaps +1, right? So ideally, when this button gets clicked, this function is getting executed and will increase our number by 1. Let's see if that works. If I were to click the button now, things work, Carlos. So we're in a good spot here.
Yeah, that looks pretty good. So we wrote an arrow function as an event handler for the onClick event. But as you said, this looks a little unclear to read. Is there a way that we can extract this function, say, to an instance method? So we can call this Cruz and then move the code over from our inline event handler.
Absolutely. So I'm doing that right now. I just cut the code from our inline ugly arrow function over to something a bit cleaner. So here we could just call this.increase, right? Will this work, Carlos?
I don't know. Let's check it out. If you click, it does not work.
It's not working. What's going on here? Well, if I were to look at our browser console, we can see a bunch of errors going on here. And this basically has to do with the fact that we are calling this.setState, but the context that this method is getting called in is not the same as our class instance. So we can fix that by adding a bind this. Gotta love JavaScript, right? So when the code refreshes, now it works. Now this is still less than ideal. Reason for that, Carlos, is because every time our component re-renders, our render function, render method is getting called over and over again. And since it is getting called over and over again, and we're calling .bind on the increase method, we're making a new reference of that method. So basically, a way to get around this is to simply, I want to call it pre-bind because I can't think of a better way to describe this right now, but in the constructor. So as soon as the class gets instantiated, we're going to pre-bind the increase method over to this. This is basically saying every time increase runs, run it within the app context. And now when we click the plus button, that things work again. Now that's cool, but that's not quite what we were showing in the slides. We were showing things conditionally showing up, right? Like we were talking about an if statement and things changing according, like as a response to the state.
Right, and not only that, but also displaying different things on the page based on the application state, right? So right now we're showing the number, just simply showing the number. But how about if we showed different elements on the page that depended on reading the value of that number, right? So one example is showing whether or not this number is a even number,
nice,
right? So we can show a message only when the number is even. So 0, 2, 4, 6, and so on and so forth would cause this message to be displayed, as opposed to 1, 3, 5, 7 would cause the message to be hidden, right?
Absolutely. Let's code that out. So the natural inclination to do this, coming from like a jQuery kind of background, would be doing something on click, maybe adding or removing a line or removing a CSS class or something of the sorts, kind of, toggling a class. In React, we get to do, again, things as a response to changes to the state. So I'm just going to add a conditional inline. I apologize for the ugly ternary operator I'm about to write. But basically what I want to say here is every time the number is even, every time it's divisible by 2, we want that div to get displayed. And when it's not divisible by 2, I wanted to just null it out. Basically, that would just remove the div from our component, and let's see if that works. Now, 0 is 0 divisible by true? I guess it is, right? Otherwise, I could just add if this.state.num is greater than 0, but we'll go with this. I click plus. 1 is not divisible by true, so it's gone from the screen. And if I click again, true is definitely divisible by true. So yeah, I think our code works, Carlos.
Right, so that's cool. So instead of listening for an event and manually changing the DOM, we're simply checking for the application state for a property on the state, and then React, again, is responsible for updating the DOM for us. So we could even add another element to the page that depended on this specific state property. So say if the number was greater than 10, we can show a message, the number is greater than 10. And again, we don't have to manually manage this div element by hiding and showing it to the page. Again, React will do this for us. As you can see now, we click the number, and once we go over 10, which shows the message. The number is greater than 10, 11. Now if we go to 12, it shows both messages. So you see here, so it gets a little complicated because sometimes we show one message, sometimes we show two messages. It depends on the number. So by writing code this way in a declarative way, this is what we call the approach that React takes to writing user interfaces. It's called the declarative, as opposed to imperative, coming from listening to events and manually changing elements on the page. So this declarative way is a little bit simpler and makes it a little bit easier to scale applications on the client side. So writing the V in MVC, as Sergio said before.
Awesome. I think we're good to get back to the slides then, right? Yeah. So let me do that. So we're done with our first part of the live demo. Demo gods were definitely generous, Carlos. It didn't blow up on the screen.
So far. So let's move on and talk about the second problem that React aims to solve, which is to reduce the number of changes made to the DOM. This is because DOM operations are quite expensive and require a lot of work on the client side. Adding and removing elements to the page, changing text, switching images, all of this requires a lot of work from browsers and might affect the user experience in our apps. Now, React's way of reducing DOM operations is with something called the virtual DOM, which you might have heard about.
Yeah, definitely. It's become the thing that we talk a lot about. So what is the virtual DOM, Carlos?
So the virtual DOM is an in-memory representation of the real DOM elements generated by React components before any changes are made to the page. It's a step that happens between the call to the render function and the displaying of the elements to the screen. So let's check out this example here. Here we have a component's render method returning some markup. We can see there's a div with two paragraphs in between, one that says good morning and the other one that says 10:45 a.m. So this markup is not the final HTML that will be added to the page yet. It's the in-memory representation of what will become real elements. This is step one. Then this in-memory representation is transformed into real HTML, which is what gets displayed in the browsers. As you can see, this is step 2. Now, when we call setState, the render function is called again. So we updated the application, the component state, and the render function is called again. So the application state changes, and then the render method is called again. So remember, the first time the render method was called, it returned the markup with the message good morning and the time, 10:45. Now, the second time that we call render, 10 minutes later, it returns the same first paragraph, good morning. However, the second paragraph now says 10:55 a.m. So the virtual DOM for the second time that render is called is compared to the current DOM structure that's on the page. And the only part of the DOM that gets updated is the paragraph with the current time, the 10:55, and not the entire div. So this virtual DOM diffing allows React to minimize changes that are made to the DOM, and therefore increasing browser performance. So now let's take a look at another live demo to take a look behind the scenes on how this virtual DOM is working.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to get back to CodePen here. Can you walk me through, Carlos, on what you'd like me to do to show this?
Yeah, absolutely. So here, every time we click the button, we're updating the application state.
So,
let's open that.
Yeah, so
cool.
Here we're looking, let me make this a little larger perhaps.
Yep.
Okay, now here we're looking at the, I don't like this view, but let's see if I can change it. Here we go. Probably a little easier. All right.
Cool. So we can see here.
So this is the 12, right? And I don't
Yep.
know, just make changes here.
Yep. But when we click that, we should see it change, right? Yep. Because that's actually part of the application state, right? But anything outside, so let's say that the plus sign on the button, right? Let's change that to plus, right? So when we click the button, don't click yet, but when we click the button, what it will cause is to call the render method again, which should return this entire div element. So if it wasn't for virtual DOM, then the entire div would be replaced with the new content. So we would see the plus text replaced by the text inside of the return function here, which is the plus sign, right? But when we click, we can see that that doesn't happen, right? The only thing that's changed in the application state was the number. The plus sign was something that we changed manually on the inspector, but as far as React knows, that plus sign hasn't changed. So whenever it compares the virtual DOM generated by the next call to render with the actual DOM elements, it will notice that the only thing that changed was actually the this.state.num, and that's the only thing that will change on the actual page.
Nice. So you're basically saying that React only updates what it absolutely has to every time it's rendered. That's pretty cool. So let's write some more code. So if I were to go to our next thing that we wanted to do here, we got a button going up and going down. I mean, nothing too new here. Should we work on this?
Yeah, let's do it. Do you want to add the decrease button now?
Yeah, let's add the decrease button.
Cool. So we'll be sharing the code pen, the link with the final code with everyone at the end of the session. So don't worry, you all have you will all have access to this, and you can play around with this later.
Yeah. So far I've added a new method called decrease, and I should probably go up here and do the same pre-binding thing I did with increase. Okay. And all I need to do is add a new button. Make it call decrease with the minus sign. And that should work. Plus, 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 minus, minus, minus. I mean, yeah, we can definitely see here the declarative nature of React. I mean, things work really nicely. And like you said, we are definitely removing this whole div altogether when it's I mean, yeah, the number is even. We're removing it altogether, but since it only does it when it absolutely has to, it's still pretty performant. That's why it still makes a lot of sense. Do we want to show anything else, Carlos, as far as live demo is concerned?
No, I think we're good with showcasing the two, I would say, biggest problems that React helps us solve. And as you can see, the second problem, the virtual DOM solution, we get this out of the box. So we get this basically for free with the way that React works.
Pretty cool. Let me get back to our presentation here then. And we should probably do a little bit of Q&A now. Now we had three, I believe it was 2 or 3 questions that it was basically recurring from Twitter and other places that we decided to kind of precede here in our slides. So the first and, biggest question we always get is, what is the difference of React and Angular, perhaps even Angular 2, Ember, or even jQuery? And we'll be happy to, to kind of go over those. So I'm going to start with Angular and Ember, kind of grouping them just because they're, well-known MVC frameworks. And what I just said, that keyword frameworks, that is the biggest difference between the two. React, it's really powerful, but ultimately it's just a Vue library. Okay. Now people like to compare the two because ultimately we're solving similar problems. We are building, large-scale user interfaces. So they're absolutely kind of related somehow. But yeah, when you look at Angular and Ember, they are full framework solutions, right? So they'll include routing libraries. They'll suggest ways of talking to remote servers via Ajax. Maybe some of them even include testing frameworks, like baked right into the framework. Whereas, like I said, React is just a library. It's just a Vue library. Now, I think I'm going to speak more so to Angular, right? I think the biggest difference of the two when you are working on Angular versus React is that Angular brings tell me what you think about this, Carlos. Angular brings JavaScript to HTML. So think ng4, ngIf. You kind of use that within your HTML template files. Now React works the other way around. It brings HTML or something similar to it. It's actually called JSX, but it brings HTML to JavaScript. So it's kind of interesting. You could actually set variables that are basically equals to a div, and you could do if statements. If if state is this, then make this div be there, and if it's not, then have it not be there. So again, we're bringing the power of templating over to JavaScript, and to me, when I'm working on both these solutions, that is the biggest difference that I feel. I feel like it's React, I'm working more in JavaScript and within the JavaScript ecosystem. Now let's talk about React and jQuery. They're both libraries, right? So are they similar? Well, React and jQuery are different because jQuery is largely used for DOM manipulation. So we showed this here. You're able to. It helps you, add classes, remove classes, add event listeners. There's a lot to jQuery, in other words, but yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. Like React is just the view again, right? Like jQuery will have a lot of utilities, like for DOM handling. It'll have built-in Ajax and a bunch of other little things. Whereas React is more so like, what do you want to display on the screen, and let's change the state and re-render kind of thing. So completely different approaches. I would say probably less comparable as far as Angular and Ember are. So like React just sits at a higher level than jQuery. jQuery assumes you're modifying the DOM directly, whereas React does that for you. Do you have anything to add to any of this, Carlos? What do you think?
Yeah, I want to go back and talk a little bit about what you mentioned, that Angular brings JavaScript to HTML, and then React is the other way around. It brings HTML into JavaScript. That's definitely the first thing that I noticed when I was learning both of those tools. So with Angular, it was getting used to the fact that we had some custom attributes to the element. So the ng4, the ngIf inside of the HTML tags and components, that's something that we got to get used to, right? And the same thing when talking about React, when we got to get used to having HTML tags inside of our JavaScript, right? So we have if statements like we just saw, have like ternary conditions, and we have variable assignments.
Did you cringe at first when you saw that?
Absolutely, absolutely, I did. But on both ends, you get used to it, right? And then you learn to see the values, you see the benefits that you get are way more than the weirdness of seeing those two things combined. So those are two amazing tools, two great communities, and don't let those small things get in the way of the bigger benefits that you get by using them.
Very well put. Well, let's move on to our next question. Next question is, what is Flux and what is Redux? So I'm gonna fly through this one a little bit, but to make a long story short, Flux, it was basically a very abstract design pattern made by Facebook engineers. It was basically, they came to a point where MVC wasn't scalable for them anymore, so they came up with an alternative, and that's what Flux was. Now it was a bit confusing because it was just a design pattern, but it also kind of included a library, kind of helping you achieve those patterns. But like I said, it's very abstract, and it just has like opinions on how data should flow through your app. And like I said, it's basically a natural progression from MVC. Now Redux, on the other end, it's a library that implements the Flux design patterns, but with more opinions on top of it. It basically simplified some of the steps that Flux suggested. But again, it just another way of kind of giving more power to your app and kind of offloading, the whole thought process of how data flows through your app. And one important thing to mention is that Redux was developed outside of Facebook, but now it was basically an open source project, and now it's heavily used even internally. So it's beautiful to see the work of the open source community coming together. Anything you'd like to say, Carlos?
Yeah, I'd like to mention it is very possible to write React components without even getting into Flux and Redux and all that stuff. Don't worry, if you're just getting started, please don't think that for you to understand React, you have to necessarily use Flux. It is totally possible to learn one and then move on to the other once you feel comfortable with the way that React alone works, right? So once you start learning React, once you start writing applications with React, once you become comfortable with the tool and you start writing larger applications, you will naturally run into issues that will then be solved by Flux. But don't try to add that early in the project, especially if you're just getting started right now, because it's a lot of things that you will have to learn, right? I mean, let alone all the build tools that we're going to mention later in this webinar, and ES 2015 and all that stuff. You don't want to add yet another element to the learning process. So it is totally possible to write React components and React applications, and also React's native applications, without ever getting into Flux, right? So please don't let that be an obstacle when learning React.
Great point. So I think we've reached the point where we're just going to answer some questions from the community here. Now, I see a lot of them coming through. Hopefully I don't get in trouble and say anything wrong. Take it with the... So what's one of the questions, Carlos?
So one of the questions is, does it make sense to use React alongside another framework or library, such as jQuery, Angular, in a project?
Okay, so let's talk about Angular first. I'm going to answer this in two different ways. Is it possible? Yes, you can. So in Angular, with Angular 1, for example, you could write a directive and kind of, basically wrap that directive and kind of write that as a React component and kind of isolation and kind of, seed data to it through, through just, like HTML attributes. But so again, it's possible. Now, does it make sense? Well, maybe not so much. After you get a little bit more into React and you start getting into just the Flux design pattern and whatnot, you start running into a lot of things that you kind of wish you didn't do that. Ultimately, both approaches are very different. Just Angular, at least Angular 1 especially, we're now moving towards a more component-based architecture as well. But historically, it was like very MVC-based, very, just model view controller. And although some people use React as the V and MVC, just the community, the way the community is moving is not really towards that. So yeah, let's move over to, as far as jQuery, you could also add jQuery to React. You absolutely can. It's better to just use React synthetic events. You get a lot of advantages with that. But it's possible. It's definitely possible. React has a lot of what we call lifecycle methods, and you could kind of add bindings and remove bindings. So yeah, hopefully I answered that right.
Cool. Next question: is React browser specific? I think what they meant is it independent across browsers? So can we write applications that we know will work the same across different vendors?
Absolutely. With the browsers that they support, which are most modern browsers, I think they're starting support with IE10. I'm not 100% sure on this now, but yes, the API is completely the same. And I will say this: not only is it possible, and you can expect the same behavior with events, it's like just a sweet spot. Like that's where you see React really shine. I just mentioned synthetic events. That's one of the things that makes React really awesome. They kind of figure out like all of the different quirkiness of event handling of each, specific browser, like on the back scenes. So you're able to just interface with events kind of, natively in a very concise, basically same way, consistently every time without having to handle too much browser-specific stuff. So yes.
Okay, so another question. So someone's asking, does React not actually change the DOM? It just overlays the diffs in memory only?
Yes, it definitely changes the DOM. The diffing process happens between the render function of your component getting called and changes actually being applied to the page. But the process of applying things to the page is actually React going in and changing the DOM directly. So the biggest difference is that it does that for us instead of us having to do that manually like we usually do with jQuery. Again, just show, hide, add class, remove class, add attribute, etc.
Cool. Now another question: what would you recommend using Ajax? Sorry, what would you recommend using for Ajax requests with React? Do we use native JavaScript or do we use another library?
Nice. Yeah. So there's the Fetch API that's really nice. It's part of newer specifications of JavaScript. There's also another library that I really like called Axios. The main advantage of both these two is that you're able to use the same library consistently if you're like writing server-side code or client-side code. One big advantage of React is that it allows for server-side rendering, so you want something that will support that. And yeah, so definitely check out either Fetch or Axios. Fetch is an upcoming browser API, native browser API. Axios is a HTTP library. What's next, Carlos?
So somebody asked, is there any template engine we need to use React?
Well, since React is the Vue library, that is all you need. Nothing in addition to it. No.
It's JSX, right?
Yeah. Should have mentioned that. React comes with JSX built in, and that's how you express your HTML elements and whatnot. So it's all built in. So definitely don't need to worry about including anything externally. It's all baked into the library.
Someone's asking, can you touch on the component did mount, component will amount, and should component update methods for rendering components?
Absolutely. I think I just mentioned lifecycle methods somewhere. That's basically what they are. And it's basically methods that get called while your component is rendering. So basically if you're like maybe making an Ajax request or like adding an event listener that React doesn't support natively, then you might want to get into learning about those lifecycle methods. If you added like an interval to your to your application. So like if you're checking, for something periodically, you definitely want to make sure that you clean that up. So there's a life cycle for that as well. Like when the component is about to be removed from the page, that would be the place to do it. So yes, that's basically what those methods are for.
All right. So how do teams deal with CSS styles within React components? Great question.
Definitely a great question. There's a lot of opinions about that in the community. And I will not answer this question directly now because I am going to suggest a course, just a Pluralsight course actually, just on styling React components. And they cover a bunch of different strategies that you can do. There's a lot of talk about just using CSS modules with Webpack, or just regular vanilla CSS, or inline styles. So again, a lot of opinions in the community. Take that course and you kind of learn about the strengths and weaknesses of each of them.
Cool. Another question, should React get executed on the server side through Node.js, or it exists only on the client's machine?
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just touched on this. It's possible to have React get completely rendered on the server side. It's usually a good idea to do that if you can. That kind of delivers a superior experience to the final users, as they don't have to wait until JavaScript gets into the page to see anything. It also helps a lot with SEO. So not only, like Google SEO, but when somebody's like including a link from like Facebook or something, you get a little preview. So yeah, definitely recommend. It's possible. Wouldn't say it's very easy, but it's definitely there and it's all possible.
Cool. Now another question. Can you give an overview of how Angular, Ember, Backbone, Node, Express each compares to React? So we're talking about a couple of different things here, right?
Definitely. So I'm going to couple Backbone. I kind of already answered this question before. Kind of going to couple Backbone into the same group as Angular and Ember. There are other frameworks for building user interfaces. And then Node and Express, they are backend technologies. Now, if you're doing server-side rendering with React, you can definitely use Express to Node and Express to like listen to HTTP calls and kind of just render your components through there and just ship the HTML ready. So that's kind of how they get related somehow. But, just from a more abstract standpoint, just Node and Express. Node is how you run JavaScript on the server side. Express is a little HTTP server, web server kind of thing for Node, and makes routing really easy. And again, React is just a Vue library.
Cool. Let's move on to the next question here. I had a good one here. Right. So kind of like touching on the thing that we mentioned, somebody's asking, is it better to learn first just React, or can I learn React and Redux at the same time?
Can you learn it? Yes, you can. Do I think you should? No. I would definitely try to learn React really well before jumping into Redux. Me personally, when I started using React, it was also the first time that I used ES 2015 code. And I found myself learning like a bunch of different concepts at the same time, and that just helped. That just didn't help my overall experience at all. So I definitely recommend just learning one thing at a time and learning that thing really well before moving on to the next thing.
So next question. This one is really cool. How is this different than two-way data binding? I'm guessing they were referring to the way that we bound properties to the state. So how is this different than two-way data binding, for example, used with Angular?
Sure, let me try to answer that one. So with two-way data binding in Angular, Angular is basically listening to browser events to happen, so like clicks and other things. And not only browser events, but like maybe when you like make an HTTP call and whatnot, like it's going to try to re-render your whole app for you. So it's basically a separate process that happens outside of your development workflow. But when it's able to detect changes, it will apply those changes to the screen for you. Whereas in React, usually it's a little bit more, it's a little simpler. It's what we call the one-way data flow. You're always kind of telling your app what to do. So in our case, and when we were doing the live demo, the page only got updated when we called set state. So that's basically us telling our app when to re-render. Whereas with Angular, it would have been Angular just kind of doing it automatically. Hope this helps. That's definitely not an easy question for sure.
Another great question. Could you build a single-page application using only React?
Yes, you can. Great question. So, however, it will require some external libraries to help you with that. For example, I mentioned earlier that React doesn't include a client-side routing library. Now, you get to install one using NPM. It's called React Router. It's a very popular one. So you use React. When you use React Router alongside with React, of course, you get routing, and that's basically, the first step to having an SPA, a single-page application. When things get a little more complex, it's definitely recommended that you start looking into Redux, because when you have a single-page application, you might have a lot of different components and different parts of the page sharing the same data, right? So you definitely will want to check out Redux for that kind of stuff. So definitely a little bit more advanced, but absolutely possible. Just takes a little bit more work.
Cool. Next question. What is the difference between React and React Native?
Awesome. So happy we get to talk about React Native. React Native is a way of running React on mobile devices. Not only mobile, actually. Now I think they're making Windows apps with React Native. But anyway, so when you look at React, I think we explained a little bit of how the virtual DOM works, right? It has some diffing algorithm, and then and only then it will apply changes to the page, right? The thing that applies changes to the page is actually called React DOM, and it's decoupled from React. Because of that whole, high-level concept, they got around to the Facebook team got around to applying the same concept to building native mobile apps. At first, it was only iOS actually, so I'm just going to mention mobile apps. So yeah, that's the main difference. You get to build native things with React, and it's actually a really neat way of doing it. So at a very high level, that's basically it. Building mobile apps with React. That's what React Native is.
Cool. Now, somebody's asking, does React work well with .NET?
So great question. I believe it does. I was actually just having a conversation with a friend that got to even do server-side rendering with .NET. I have no idea how that works, but yes, it does. It works really well. Usually, though, in more modern practices, that you're going to be maybe consuming something similar to you're going to be consuming an API, something similar to a RESTful server, or even more modern things that people are coming out with. So from that standpoint alone, literally, as long as you have a web server running with an endpoint that React gets to consume, I mean, really, it doesn't matter what you have on the server side. Of course, as long as you're not trying to do something like server-side rendering. But yeah, absolutely, it works well with .NET. It works well with anything that's able to serve JSONs from a web server.
Cool. Now, another question, do you foresee React going through any major transformations like Angular did, going from version 1 to version 2?
Yeah, Carlos and myself got to chat with the React team a little bit before we built the Code School course, and we were very interested in that. And basically what they said is that no, they don't foresee rewriting it or having even any major changes to the public API. They said it's stable. That's what they use even internally at Facebook a lot, and it definitely wouldn't be to their advantage to rewrite the whole thing. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be incremental changes with every with every with every version that comes out. We can definitely expect it to grow and for it to change a little bit. But no, nothing. I haven't heard of anything as far as a complete rewrite and whatnot.
Cool. Now another question that I had flagged here. So this one is actually very interesting because it's another thing that I noticed. People make it sound like it's a essential step into writing React applications, which is environment and build tools. So this question here: what is the best environment to develop React? Is it Webpack? Is it running it on a server in Node.js?
Yeah, great question. Definitely depends on your use case. But it seems to me the React community at large have adopted Webpack a lot. Now, using Webpack it's not necessarily mutually exclusive to have it rendered on the server side with Node. Webpack is basically a very powerful task runner that gives you a bunch of different things, like module loading and So yes, definitely recommend using Webpack. It's pretty great. If you're not ready for it, if you want something a little simpler, then perhaps Go Open Browserify will do the job for now. Or even just, if you just want to try things out, go to CodePen and get a React thing going there. I mean, good thing about React is it's just vanilla JavaScript, so you could just run it anywhere. It's kind of hard to have an objective answer to what is the best way of doing it, but in just a little bit, I will also pitch a course by Corey House, and he explains exactly how to get your Webpack setup going, and I really like it. So yeah, definitely recommend checking that out. I think we have time for one more question, maybe.
Yeah. So this one's going to be the last question. How can I combine multiple React components? Can they be in multiple files, or one component per file is possible? How does that work?
Great question. So it's related to what we just talked about, like how you're building your application. If you're using something like Webpack or even Go Open Browserify, you can definitely have one. Oh my goodness. You can definitely have one component per file and just use maybe even the ES 2015 module loader, so you just get to include files and use them. Now, as far as how to do it, React is all about composing components together. So it's you import it in a variable and we'll use it within JSX basically by wrapping it with little brackets just like HTML. But yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for all the questions. We are going to start wrapping up this whole webinar, and I hope you all have enjoyed it so far. So let's really talk about, teams. Is your team ready to use React? And a question that we get a lot is, how do we pitch React to our team? How can we go about it? And last year I went to a conference, React Rally, and watched a really good talk by somebody from PayPal on how they went about migrating their whole, not everything, but parts of their UIs over to React. And the whole talk was just about this, like how, what is the best strategy? And it's basically all about starting small. Just pick a small feature within your existing applications and that React would be a good fit for, and just let your team kind of fall in love with it, right? So yeah, definitely just start small. Identify just something that you might want to try it out with, and kind of let it grow organically. I think that might be the best way, not only to pitch React, but really anything. But the main advantage of React is that it allows you to start small. It doesn't take over your whole page as soon as you start using it in a project. So that's definitely a plus about it. Now, how can we go about using React? How can we start? First step is definitely learning it and learning it well. We touched on this in the live Q&A. Understand React really well before you learn Redux. That'll only work to your advantage. and learn the tooling that React uses. And tooling, the cool thing about tooling is that it's not specific to React. So when we talk about Webpack and when we talk about Group, and we talk about all of the different things that are out there, we're really talking about the whole JavaScript ecosystem. And the main advantage to me of React is that it plays really well with that whole ecosystem. So learn that separately, apply that. Again, it'll be really hard to learn it all at once. So let's see how we can go about learning. Well, we at Code School, we made a course called Powering Up with React. And our intention with the course was that we just wanted to teach you React at its simplest form. We didn't want you to get distracted with getting, something complicated like Webpack set up and whatnot. We didn't want you to get confused with Flux or Redux just yet. We wanted you to learn React at its simplest form. And that's what the course is all about. So definitely check that out. Got a URL here on the screen. I think we'll make the slides downloadable later, so you're more than welcome to download them and check out the links and whatnot. But yes, Powering Up with React at Code School is a great way of getting started. No distractions. It's a lot of in-browser videos, and then you're taking challenges. It's a really good experience. I might be biased because I was the instructor for that course, but yeah. My other course I'll recommend is this is on Pluralsight.com. It's called Building Applications with React and Redux in ES6. The instructor for this was Corey House. I took the course and I really enjoyed it. When you start getting a little bit more advanced in React, you're definitely going to want to check something like this out. It'll cover on how to get your development environment set up. And it'll actually do it through Webpack. So if you are interested in Webpack, this is definitely a good course to do it. It'll cover Redux as well. It'll cover unit testing on how to go about unit testing components. So yeah, great course. It's not meant to be a first course or a first experience with React. Definitely check that out. And the last one is how to style React components, styling React components. The instructor was my friend, Jake Trent. This is also on Pluralsight.com. And it'll just cover the different strategies to styling React components and the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. I mentioned this earlier. There are a lot of strong opinions in the community as far as how React components should be styled. And Jake Trent does a really good job at covering all of those. So definitely check that out. Again, React is all about building user interfaces, and user interfaces need styling. So definitely part of the whole process. And then as far as tooling, what to do, what to use. So I would definitely recommend using a build tool when you start using React. It's possible to just drop a React.js and a plain web page and kind of have the JSX transpiling on the fly. If you follow the React tutorial on the React documentation, great tutorial by the way, but yeah, that's what they'll use. But if you're getting ready for production, I would highly recommend using a build tool. And like I said, it seems like the community at large have widely adopted Webpack, so it might be worth checking that out. Also, get familiar with ES 2015. We have a really good course here at Code School as well for that. Carlos was the author for that course. But yeah, all in all, React works really well with ES 2015. It's all about and you can use Babel to transpile ES 2015 code over to browsers, to code that browsers understand. I was going to say, Carlos, ES 2015 is JavaScript of the future, but I realized that 2015 was last year, so it's already the past. My goodness. But definitely take advantage of the latest JavaScript language features that it provides. I would highly recommend these few things when getting started. Anything you'd like to add, Carlos, as far as closing remarks before we go?
No, that's it. Hopefully this was clarifying for everybody. Those of you that didn't know anything about React, hopefully you're excited to learn more. about this tool. And yeah, so we're out there on the internets available. If y'all have any questions, any comments, any concerns, just drop us a line on Twitter or send us an email. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being part of this webinar. I hope you all had as much fun watching it as we did making it here. So thank you, thank you. I think Lindsay is going to jump back on to say goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for presenting and taking so many awesome questions from the participants. And everyone, thank you for joining and taking the time to learn about React today. Like Carlos and Sergio said, you can continue the conversation, follow us on Twitter, tweet about the experience today. We are giving away a free month of training for both Code School and Pluralsight. Again, so just tweet about us and tag your comment with hashtag PluralsightLive. Again, you can email us directly at webinars@pluralsight.com. And if you have any additional questions that we didn't get to, please let us know. And, oh, one other thing, yes, we did record the presentation, so if you joined us late or you missed it, we'll have that up in a few days, and we'll send out helpful links. We'll send out a link to the recording itself, and anything else, any other additional resources that we have will be coming your way shortly. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.